This next segment I think is really important. It's something that has like super flown under the radar. Not a lot of mainstream outlets have covered it a whole lot. And if they had, if it's been mostly in passing. To be honest, there's been more coverage on The Onion than on places like MSNBC and CNN. And what is it we're talking about? We're talking about this new National Security Presidential Memorandum. So, like, what is this? What is What is an NSPM? What is NSPM 7? We're going to get into the details of that. So, on September 25th, 2025, Donald Trump signed the National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, or NSPM 7 for short, which flew under the radar for the majority of news outlets. Fortunately, journalist Ken Klippenstein, who you can find on Substack, reported this story, and he's continuing to, keep us updated with a lot of the details that he's finding through his investigations. Many might have heard about how the president recently labeled Antifa a terrorist organization in an executive order. However, this memorandum expands on this order, which not only targets organizations or groups, but individuals identified with the following indicia, or what are indicators, of violence, which is anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, anti-Christianity, support for overthrowing the United States government, extremism on migration, extremism on race, extremism on gender, hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on family, and hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on religion, and hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on morality. Though these types of national security memorandums are usually kept secret, we don't tend to hear about them until well after the fact. The Trump administration chose to make this one public in order to make it clear that they are targeting left-wing groups and individuals by designating them as prime targets for federal law enforcement. So the legal implications of this are fairly far-reaching. So not only is it is choosing to target politically motivated, but it could also lead to targeting nonprofits and advocates who fall under this very wide-sweeping banner. Law firms have stated that it could cause the federal government to pursue IRS investigations of nonprofit groups, assess terrorism designations, and block nonprofit assets, and even target individual officers and employees of nonprofits. Overall, this memorandum is meant to discourage any form of activism and free speech as a whole, whether it be through independent political organizations comprised of private citizens or nonprofit corporations that have private donors or funding from the government. Presently, there is a very hush-hush threat screening center in Vienna, Virginia, which was initially created in the wake of 9/11, which is processing all of this information. So the pre-existing terror watch list, which President Trump inherited, lists approximately 1.1 million people, but only around 6,000 of them are American citizens and permanent residents, the majority of whom are unsurprisingly Muslims, who the government considers as potential individuals who could perform quote-unquote lone wolf attacks. This is highly ironic because we've seen throughout American history, basically every lone wolf attack has been performed by white supremacists. Until this past month, there were actually limits to even what the FBI would do with regards to, pre-crime initiatives, a la Minority Report. The way to this present moment was paved both by the Obama and the Biden administrations with the creation of the Transnational Organized Crime List and the recognition that the terror watch list wasn't about just terrorists any longer, at least in the traditional sense, i.e., Muslim extremist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So there have been a couple of instances within the past year of violence towards ICE officials, as in the case with the Dallas ICE shooter in July. And then there was also the attack on a facility in Texas that led to one officer being shot in the neck. But there's been no federal agents who have been killed within the past year. Despite this, the federal government is looking to cast a wide net with who it deems a threat, specifically looking to associate Antifa and anti-ICE activism with the recent No Kings protests under the banner of quote-unquote hating America, which is a pretty big stretch, given like anybody who participated in any of the No Kings protests would say it was essentially, the Women's March 2.0, with somehow even less substance. I don't know how that's possible, but it seems
You just
like,
put in more American flags.
yeah, you just put in more American
Hamilton
flags.
references.
Yeah, exactly.
Wear some powdered wigs.
It's pretty bad. But yeah, so the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, recently said, quote, Antifa is just as sophisticated as MS-13, as TDA, Tren de Aragua, and ISIS, as Hezbollah, as Hamas, as all of them. At this point, they are investigating every possible angle, initially targeting organizations like Rose City Antifa in Portland, Oregon, Refuse Fascism, Anti-Racist Action, Redneck Revolt, and the John Brown Gun Club, as well as potential benefactors of different social justice causes like the Tides Foundation and Rice Singham, who has been known to donate to organizations like Code Pink and different PSL-affiliated organizations like the Answer Coalition and the People's Forum. So far, we've seen a couple of people specifically targeted for posts they've made on social media, such as a teacher and a journalist, Elias Cepeda of University of Illinois, who was held for 12 hours and has been released for weeks without having any charges pressed, as well as a historian and associate professor of Rutgers University, Mark Bray, who is the author of the book Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook in 2017. He recently fled the country to Spain with his family after being doxxed and receiving a number of death threats. So this case is related to the TPUSA campaign where they have like a running list of teachers and professors they considered extremists. But the Rutgers chapter took it even further by specifically targeting him after the signing of this order and this memorandum. There is even a case of a special needs teacher, Miles Serafani from Arizona, who was visited by special agents at his home over his attendance of a protest in June earlier this year. Overall, we see the federal government is attempting to redefine what a terrorist is without a clear statute. Let's be clear, there isn't a clear statute that they have for domestic terrorism, because ultimately, if they did have to do that with designation, or if they would have tried to do that in the past, they would have not only gone after, what they consider like Muslim extremist groups, but they would also have to go after these white supremacist groups, which are way more of, in the United States. We've seen way more acts that could be legitimately deemed terrorism by these white supremacist extremist groups. But overall, what this is meant to do, as far as I see it, is like having a chilling effect on people who are involved in activism and embolden the feds to actively pursue individuals and organizations which fall under this banner. I have more thoughts about this stuff, but I've talked enough. I'd be curious to hear what you're thinking about this stuff, Dayton.
Well, I think another piece is ultimately also that the Trump administration is trying to sort of signal to its base, which is quite small, quite militant, quite traditionalist Christian, quite like evangelical fascist, right? And I think that's why so much of this stuff is really about. It's why these definitions are so broad, like opposition to traditional American values. I don't think there's so many variations of what we mean when we say traditional, right? Like it's not a legal term, right? Yeah. And even then, like these association with these different left-wing groups, it's all just groups that made some type of media splash during the first Trump administration, like Redneck Revolt and the John Brown Gun Club. I'm pretty sure those groups don't exist anymore. Like these been
if they do, they have very limited membership.
Right, they've been defunct for 5-6 years, but like elderly evangelical people in the Bible Belt really think of these people as the devil. But more importantly, I think it also just shows like just how dispersed and weak the left is right now, right? That they're like in previous periods of war and upheaval in this country, there's been specific social actors that have been made the scapegoat. I think a good example would be the Socialist Party during the First World War, or even Students for Democratic Society during the Vietnam War, right? Like to say Antifa is an organization, which is not true. Antifa is a trend on the internet. It's not an organization. You can't tell these people that because that's not what these 5 to 15% of Americans that are really big into Christian fascism care about. You can't tell them that the boogeyman doesn't exist. And that's not, the Trump administration is not interested in telling them that boogeymen are not exist. They're going to use boogeymen to control these very, very vocal 10 to 15% of the whites to get what they want, right? Because let's be clear, the Trump base is not 50% of Americans like the DNC will have you believe. It's like a very vocal 10 to 20% of people. Most people are politically not engaged, right? So they're trying to organize this very vocal section of people around these dog whistles while giving a wide latitude to just sort of pop it on anybody that's going to come together and try to oppose what the government is doing. Right. And so it's anybody, right? Because there's no sort of organized focus of resistance in this country, the U.S. government is just looking around everywhere trying to snuff shit out, afraid that something's going to take that position. There's going to be some new anti-imperialist national organization. But I think we're very clear that there are none. There's no good organizations that are able to really lead resistance at the national level or even the local level right now. And that is the big problem that we have to solve in the United States movement. There's all these so-called new measures to limit on dissent, but where are the organized dissenters to be used on? And I think the point you're saying about a chilling effect is important. They're trying to discourage people from doing that. And I think we have to see that that's the case, then we need to actually take these things on concretely and directly, right? They're trying to prevent people from even organizing the most basic things at all. And we can't allow that to happen. And we also can't allow resistance just take the form of these totally feckless demonstrations like No Kings. Like, I'm not saying people who go to No Kings protests are feds. I'm not trying to say that there's nothing positive about these things. But we have to be very clear that these things are safe, co-optable trends of resistance that the DNC loves to organize and promote to keep people from doing more militant things.
I mean, yeah, if you looked at some of the footage from some areas across the country, like just the amount of protests that were happening specifically on sidewalks where people were refusing to go into the streets, that basically says it all.
Yeah, and God forbid they have foreign flags. I remember like seeing some of these, was it Indivisible? They'll literally discourage people from waving foreign flags. Like, well, this is about protecting our American heritage. And it's like, that's where you really see where these DNC people are so crazy. That reminds me of the stuff with Trump making a ballroom or possibly a bunker in the White House, right? People are saying, he's desecrating the White House, a symbol of our national pride. It's like, well, first off, the Canadians have already burned that building down a couple times. It's not hallowed. It's been burned before. It was constructed by slaves. It's not a big goddamn deal if you modify it. But it really shows that, that's really, that's the organized opposition to Trump of this kind. It's like people who just say we need, a return to American civility, where you couldn't see the slave labor, where you couldn't see the desecration of American symbols. Just do that on the back road. And I think, that's why we have to see different trends, like the Prop 50 wave we're seeing in California is another noxious. It's like the other side of this. We have the NSPM, or the PSNM?
National Security Presidential Memo.
National Presidential Security. So the NPSM, you have the NPSM 7 on one side, but then you have Prop 50 on the other side, right? Where the Democrats saying, look at these Republicans. They're so authoritarian. They're so anti-democratic. Let's do some non-democratic things ourselves to offset them. And what happens? Trump leaves office in a couple years, and then we just have a new DNC administration that has all these anti-democratic tools, all these new security memorandums to continue Trump's work. So it's like, if we don't actually see the bait for the switch, the carrot and the stick, we're going to end up with a Democratic administration in 2028 that has all these fascist tools to use on left-wing activists that have been trying to get organized to resist just Trump.
Yeah, they're not going to do it. They're not going to dismantle the majority of that, if all of it. Just kind of as a quick side note, did you see what they did on the White House website with the timeline of the White House being built?
No, I did not.
It's actually hilarious. I mean, I think this is just a quick side note, but they were trying to outline the whole timeline of the White House being built in typical fashion of this administration. They also put in the Monica Lewinsky Clinton scandal and cocaine discovered. It was probably Hunter Biden's. It's pretty funny, but that really, it just kind of speaks to like where this administration's head is at.
They're just talking to their donors.
Yeah,
just talking to people to give them money.
it's a lot of virtue signaling, you know. If I'm looking at this specifically, you know, the things that I feel like they're most looking to go at and have been most vocal about are, you know, people who are explicitly protesting fascism in meaningful ways and have an understanding of that. Or might just be, you know, participating in some sort of like adventurous action related to that. People who are, you know, protesting ICE and these very authoritarian like immigration measures that the administration's taking on. And then also transgender people. You know, it seems like that's been a big focus of this particular administration, really driving home this idea that all of these school shootings are transgender folks when, you know, as we brought up in our last episode, it's a statistical outlier. You know, it's not who's doing this pretty much all the time. And yeah, I think it's really important to recognize like there isn't a coherent, like organized resistance that's like going beyond the measures of like what's considered acceptable within a liberal democracy or a capitalist democracy that exists right now. I believe like in the past when there have been these types of memorandums put forward, you know, they have been pretty wide sweeping, but have been more targeted. You know, they have gone after, you know, specifically communists and communist organizations at a time where there were, you know, there was a communist party, there were communist organizations. And they were also trying to sweep people into that who they thought, you know, they could get away with calling communists, whether it be Oppenheimer, whether it be different like movie stars, authors and whatnot. But at this time, you know, they're really reaching for straws in a lot of respects because they don't really know where they're going with this in some ways. A lot of it is virtue signaling, and it might have some effect on, you know, the organizing that people do. So I'm not saying like we should just like totally discount this as like whatever and like not pay attention to it. But at the same time, it's not as focused as an actually competent administration would put forward, and a future administration could actually give this some more teeth than it has. I think essentially, you know, there's two parts to it. On one side, like, you know, people should be conscious about what they post online. They should be, you know, make smart decisions about like the things that they do, but also people should not be discouraged to participate in political activism, period. You know, that is the intent of what something like this is doing at the bottom line. And if this discourages people from like getting politically involved or like showing up to events or like reading stuff online, you know, it's accomplishing its goal essentially. Mm-hmm. And I think ultimately like people can't be afraid of that. Obviously, you know, people shouldn't be dumb. You know, we shouldn't do dumb stuff with this stuff, like make our profiles public and then start like posting all these hashtags and like adding like, you know, the president and stuff. But at the same time, you know, it's like we still have free speech. We still have the ability to organize. We still have all of these tools at our disposal. And, you know, it's only more recently that we're seeing a lot of this stuff come into question. But that doesn't mean that it's just disappeared, you know. They might try and make it disappear, but, you know, there's still a vast majority of people who recognize that, you know, this stuff is important. Even people who are further on the right in the Republican Party see something like this, and they're like, this is taking it a step too far. You know, not everybody's on board with this. So there is opposition even within the Republican Party. There's not a lot of opposition from what I've seen with the Democrats. There's probably like a handful of people who are against this because, let's be realistic, it's the Democrats. But, you know, a lot of people who, if they learned about this, they would probably be like, what the fuck, this is ridiculous. Even if I don't agree with this stuff, like, this is clearly an infringement on free speech. You can't target people specifically for their beliefs or like things that they say based on these ideas, because that's the foundation of any sort of democracy, you know, of free speech, of being able to do all these things. So, yeah.
Well, and I think Yeah, it's like we have to seize this time right now, right? Like especially with this ability to make this exposure to average people, right? Like it's so that's why it's so funny that they draw this line or this whole Antifa as an organization. Well, Antifa is just short for anti-fascism, right?
Yeah.
So this idea that opposing fascism is somehow terrorism and trying to normalize that amongst people. I don't think they have a lot of basis to do that, but all it would take is like one some type of false flag national security event to actually start mobilizing some people around this idea of national security.
Yeah.
You think of like things during COVID as a good example. Like see how quickly the government was able to use like these sort of cries for public health and public safety to get people to just back whatever the government was saying at the time. Which is since a lot of that stuff was all walked back or was proven scientifically to be less effective. And I think, there's a likelihood. That's why I think a lot of like this Trump posturing around Venezuela really is trying to create like this sense of wartime urgency that's going to get people to start taking up these security concerns, right? Like with, Trump targeting like Venezuelan fishermen in the Caribbean, just blowing up these fishing vessels.
Yeah, it's fucked up.
Yeah, claiming that they're like terror groups, claiming that they're militant groups trying to launch attacks, They're really trying to create some bit of provocation that's going to get people to like want these security measures. I think that was a big thing is what was going down with Charlie Kirk, right? Especially with his killing. I haven't been convinced that wasn't a false flag because his views were going down. I still think they got him. I still think that was an inside job personally. But you see the really fanfare is really this idea like, oh no, freedom of speech is falling. The left is going to kill all our icons. Of course, that was widely dismissed. He himself was killed by his own right-winger. And ultimately, the mass of people didn't buy it. He was supposed to be the white Martin Luther King, and then he just left the news cycle after a couple weeks because young people don't fuck with Charlie Kirk. Only conservative Gen Xers fuck with Charlie Kirk. And so we have these funerals, these big political parades, and it's just the most deplorable, ugly-looking motherfuckers talking about how they love Charlie Kirk. It does not encourage a new fascist mass movement. They were selling fucking T-shirts at his goddamn funeral. Like people can see through that, and it freaks them out. So this administration is really grasping for legitimacy. And the DNC is doing nothing, biding time for their turn. Like I said before, this Prop 50 stuff, we're going to see how these midterms, my sense is that Democrats are just kind of like buying their time for midterms, and they're going to really try to pull out all the stops to just unseat Trump at the next election and then just, carry on business as usual. What the national situation will look like in the next couple of years is anybody's guess. But I think it's high time for some crazy shit to go up on the media that's really going to drum up some popular support for this stuff because it's so paper thin, it's so silly, and it's on us to really expose this stuff and think with our brains and not just look for another DNC figure to put our faith in. I hate when people are asking us, does anyone know what electeds coming up are worth their salt? And it's like, yuck.
None of them.
Yuck.
None of them.
Yuck. And that Prop 50 stuff is so funny because they'll use all these conservative examples like, look at this rural central district in the Central California. With Prop 50, they could have a gay congressman.
Or even like this whole Graham Plattner situation. It's like, were people really surprised that a dude that like did like 4 tours in Iraq and like worked for BlackRock had a Totenkopf tattoo? Like,
but he's a Democrat.
It's like, yeah.
He's a Democrat. You didn't
like,
know.
It's like
he just got it in Croatia with the rest of the white supremacists there.
It's very ridiculous. And yeah, people are really looking for anybody to grasp onto. And that's also true with the right. We've seen like when Kash Patel immediately posted after like this like ICE facility shooting. It's like they wrote anti-ICE on their bullets. It's like, first of all, anybody who's protesting ICE, that's not really how they're framing it. They're saying like melt ICE, fuck ICE or some shit. And second of all, like how quickly that dude is posting stuff, you just know he's like on the brink of going in a K-hole. He's like, this is it. This is my moment.
Oh, it's like he's incompetent, right? This guy was a
He's,
podcaster before. He's the director of the FBI. Like, he's clearly a political hire who has no political skills. He, had some background in law enforcement, sure, but he doesn't have the credentials of like a toady of his status. So now all he can do is do media shit. And so it's pretty clear this guy is like on timeout in the FBI. He's made too many media gaffes, so they just have him doing PR because he's brown. And because he's willing to say stupid shit that the president likes. He's like one bad tweet away. Like, if he offends like a white woman in the White House, he's done. Like, he's fucking done, dude. Like, if anybody, like he just does one thing.
He's
He's
just
out.
got to rub Donald Trump the wrong way.
He's just
one
gotta
time.
like
That's
compliment him
that's
the
how petty
wrong
he is.
way.
Everybody
right?
knows that. We saw what happened with Elon.
Watch, Donald Trump's gonna say he smells and just get rid of him quietly. Yeah, he'll do some racist shit, man. Like, he'll do some racist shit.